podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist and critical posthumanist research. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
Hi, my name is Vivienne Bozalek. I'm an emerita professor in women's and gender studies at the University of the Western Cape and an honorary professor in the Centre for Higher Education, Teaching, Learning and Research, otherwise known as CHURTL, at Rhodes University. Both of these universities are in South Africa. The title of my chapter is Rendering Each Other Capable, Doing Responsible Research Responsibly. Now you would have noticed the use of the word responsible and responsible. This is because I think that for rendering each other capable in research, it's important to ensure that the process is both responsible, that is, accountable to social justice and care ethics, as well as responsible, in other words, being responsive, as well as creating possibilities for whatever or whoever is engaging in research to be able to respond. The chapter discusses the usual principal ethics which are devised by ethics committees at universities, which students and researchers at these universities are generally compelled to write ethical statements to prior to doing their research about how they're going to comply with these ethical principles. Principal ethics, the most established approach to health and social science ethics, are based upon rights-based approaches and traditional social justice theories, which tend to favor masculinist, universal, rule-based activities. These rules assume a view of the world which Donna Haraway has referred to as that of the modest witness, the objective scientist who's operating from an unmarked, invisible position, who mirrors reality through a God's eye view, a trick of seeing everything from nowhere. Principal ethics are useful in that they were developed from human rights abuses and considered ways of protecting those who are being researched from harms which may arise, and from having the liberty of stopping with the research process. As an alternative to principal ethics, also known as theoretico-juridical ethics, which are based on the idea of an atomistic, discrete individual, the chapter considers how the notions of responsibility and responsibility are useful for research. The chapter thinks with the political ethics of care and post-human ethics, both of which are based on a relational ontology. A relational ontology holds that entities don't precede relationships, but come into being through relationships. The political ethics of care and post-human ethics have both considered the notions of responsibility and responsibility, and this chapter reads these two approaches through each other in order to get new insights into them, opening up possibilities of doing research differently. As researchers, we need to be responsible and responsive towards the issues and the phenomena we are doing inquiries into. This requires detailed and situated accounts of practices in order to establish how responsibility and responsibility is assigned and negotiated. Cultivating responsibility and the ability to respond opens up collective experimenting and collaborative risk-taking in research. Now I'm going to be discussing some questions which could be considered by researchers, higher education teachers and students in traversing this chapter. So here are some of the questions. What are some of your experiences with doing ethical statements for research committees? Does signing a research form really protect those who are made into subjects of research from harm being done to them? If ethical committees decide prior to the research being conducted what is important for ethics, how does this relate to rendering each other capable or becoming with the other in research, which happens imminently, in situ, and cannot be anticipated in advance? Can you think of situations which bring out aspects of privilege where certain people are able to free themselves from responsibilities and assign responsibilities to others? How does a justice to come, which involves an ongoing practice of ethics, help us to think about non-innocence, responsibility, and the ability to respond? What do you think cultivating responsibility in research practices would entail? How do you think paying attention to how things could be done differently could contribute to cultivating the capacity or the ability to respond, and in turn as a way of rendering each other capable? How could we best devise responsible questions in research? If responsibility is not ours alone, but part of our entanglements with others or the other, how does this change the way we see and do responsibility in research processes? Similarly, if responsibility is not intentional or something one chooses, as Karen Barad suggests in her book Meeting the Universe Halfway, and if responsibility is never finished or located in dualistic relationships, what implications does this have for research ethics and ethical practices? How does non-innocence speak to the notion of responsibility, and how do you think this can be acknowledged in research? Can you think about how ethical committees tend to separate out political, ethical, epistemological, and ontological issues? And could you give some examples of this? How can research ethical committees and the notion of indeterminacy be considered together? Can you consider how Karen Barad's notion of objectivity is different from conventional ways of thinking about objectivity? How is Barad's objectivity linked to responsibility? And finally, how does worlding relate to responsibility and accountability? Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.postqualitativeresearch.com, and please stay tuned for future podcasts.